Lovely to meet you all. I hope that we can have a really nice discussion. So what I want to do is just like drop in some seeds and some nuggets for you to sort of contemplate, and then let's have a discussion. I'm going to share some slides with you. So just bear with me while I bring that up. Hopefully you can see all this. So yes, the topic is redefining success. And there's a really interesting story here because these slides are actually 5 years old. And I have updated it twice. Once in 2017. Once I started in 2017. Once in 2019. And once yesterday. So, and the majority of them are like still standing. So this is the story. I used to be in corporate, like I was an industry exec, as they call it, right? I think many of you would have had that experience. I'm 15 years in the workforce. I've worked for some big brands like FedEx, TNT, DSM, PwC, and about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, I thought, you know what, I've got all this consulting ability. I want to go into freelance. I want to get the most of this gig economy thing, right? And the area that I'd always been in was digitization and performance improvement. So what I wanted to go into was this whole notion of helping companies drive a digital transformation better, right? Through change management and all that stuff. And in order to do that, I needed to understand a little bit more about what digital transformation actually was. And what started out 5 odd years ago as an attempt to understand what this is and why some companies are doing it better than others, I've ended up becoming a founder of tech software, of tech, and specifically around well-being. So here we go, without further ado, some of the key insights. So as I mentioned, I needed to research the topic of digital transformation, right? But one of the things that was super interesting as I went into this term was I realized that people that are in the tech world hate the term digital transformation. They were just allergic to it, right? So I was like, okay, why? Well, it turns out that digital transformation is nothing more than innovation. It's technical innovation, right? But there are two extremes. One is incremental innovation, and the other one is disruptive innovation. And it's super important to know the difference, because incremental innovation is when you do enhancements to existing products and services. And disruptive innovation, which is like what we call cool and sexy, is new business models and value systems. This is typically where startups sit. Now, in order to understand the topic, I wanted to sort of see, a majority of my time had been in corporate giants. But when you look at the disruptive space, most of the learnings came from startups and scale-ups. So 5 years ago, I started to spend more time in this world. And there are some interesting facts when it comes to the world of digital, but just the world of work in general. One, something that all of us should know is that 80% of employees are not engaged. Right? The other is that by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be digital natives. When you add to that the influx of startups promising all sorts of amazing workplaces, you can imagine what has been happening in the world of work. And you will see that these articles are indeed from 2017. But the story is still the same. Right? What large organizations were talking about back then, and I think they're still talking about now, is agile, design thinking, fail fast, we only hire top talent, autonomy, data-driven decision-making. But for the large part, what they actually do is detailed reporting, short-term financial results, fail-proof initiatives, maintaining the status quo, preserving hierarchy. So back then, I noticed that we had a little bit of this going on. A lot of promises, but it didn't really stack up. So I wanted to understand a little bit more about the startup scene. And is it true? So I decided to look beyond the buzz. I ended up going to Silicon Valley for research. This is 2017. I went with a question. What are the values which are critical for success for a startup? So in terms of success for a startup, we look at two things. It's from inception to IPO or acquisition. Right? And what are the structures necessary to uphold these values? I spoke to these startups, founders and leaders. Interesting fun fact, since 2017, about 7 of these are now unicorns, so they're worth more than $1 billion. 2 of them don't exist. Back then, it was not about the money. It was about attracting the best people and harnessing the collective genius of those people. I don't think anything's changed here. In 2019, I went on another research. It was the end of 2018. This is pre-COVID. I wanted to understand, what about outside of Silicon Valley? Is it true? What are the principles and practices used by organizations that are focused on digitalization and innovation? So essentially trying to emulate the same thing that I was studying over in Silicon Valley. This time, I spoke to a lot more organizations. Right? This is, I think, 25 or so. And what I came across was that it pays to understand individual motivation and behavior and develop practices which bring out the best in people. But towards the end of 2018, what I found was old mindsets were halting the change. So whereas in startups, it's new and fresh and we're trying to do things at speed and break barriers. In the traditional organizations that are trying to emulate digitization and innovation, it was typically old mindsets that were making it difficult. And then along came COVID. And when it did, the old mindsets had no choice. And what we've seen is that what may have taken us 10 years has taken us 2. What you're about to see are essentially the same list that I had in 2017, except they're coming into reality now. So let's talk about those. We're moving from service-driven to purpose-led. We're moving from corporations to networks. We're moving from teams to teaming. We're moving from knowing to learning. We're moving from management to coaching. And we're moving from prescriptive to predictive. What does it mean, service-driven to purpose-led? It's important then, as an individual, it's important to be purpose-led as an individual. It's not something that your company can do for you. For the longest time, every time I would research purpose, and this is in 2018, 19, and I would find so much about company purpose, company mission statements. But what we're finding now is that a company can have a great purpose, but if there's no alignment between what the individual seeks to do and that company purpose, it's essentially a misalignment. What people need to do is to find ways to still their mind. And this is what COVID and the pandemic brought us. It was a moment for us to collectively still our minds. It means that we need to be more conscious about how we spend our time. And let's look around us with the Great Resignation. When you look at who's leaving, it's the knowledge workers. It's people recognizing and realizing actually what I'm doing and what I want to do or what brings me great meaning, they don't add up and they're moving in droves. Let's look at Ikigai. This is becoming a a lot more relevant now as people are actively seeking it. And remember that statistic that by 2025, 75% will be digital natives. They come out of university looking for it. From corporations to networks, realize that people are joining causes. They're not joining organizations. And organizational lines, boundaries are blurring. What that means is we are now moving to that network of teams. That means that you need to facilitate the performance of purpose-built units. And you need to develop ways to measure individual contribution to that. And let's talk about this whole organizational lines blurring and people are joining causes. Let's think about that terrible situation that we've got now between Ukraine and Russia. And let's make it very practical. This is my colleague posting to me that somebody else in the network had said, hey, there's a way for us as a startup to support people in Ukraine. Within a few minutes, it was shared. This is some tax advisor putting it out there like, hey, startups, there's a way to help. Have you guys noticed how the technological leaders have basically started to band together to help drive a cause? We have stepped aside from what we were working on day to day. This is what we're seeing more and more. And as society has more and more challenges, more and more people are looking for opportunities to help. This is just a very practical example of it. From teams to teaming. You need to invest in the people's ability to team. That means you don't just look at that group as a perfect team. You look at the individuals and their ability to team. You're looking at how quickly someone can work effectively with others. You need to allow people to gravitate to roles that are inherent to their skills and emphasize the importance of soft skills. This is what the World Economic Forum had said in 2017 would be the top skills of 2022. So it's nice to look back. This is what I showed 5 years ago. And let's see, is it true? Is it important to have analytical thinking and innovation skills right now? Is it important to have active learning and learning strategies? Is it important to be creative? How important is technology? What about critical thinking analysis and complex problem solving? I would say the World Economic Forum was right on the money. And COVID's just accelerated it. These skills are still to this day very valid, and in fact, it's becoming more valid. Emotional intelligence is becoming super important. From knowing to learning. Reward curiosity, not egos. Middle management protecting their jobs because they, quite frankly, they work really hard to get there is not a good enough reason. Talent will leave. You need to promote adaptability, continuous learning, and help everyone make smarter decisions using data. Prepare is an interesting learning and development platform, and their focus is all about power skills. And they've spun out, I think, in the last few years. Intentional learning, analytical thinking. These are the skills that the majority of their customers are looking for. It's not how to code Python. From management to coaching. Aim to coach, not to delegate. And I think the group here would agree with this. Use different ways to empower people to do better, to be better, and create a culture of providing regular and timely feedback. Again, where software can help. This is InPraise. They just got acquired by BetterUp. And this is a screenshot from 5 years ago. And what they were trying to do was, how do we get people to provide more regular feedback, not wait for their annual performance review? This kind of technology enables us to help drive conversation at the time that conversation needs to happen. from prescriptive to predictive. Use data to better understand employee behavior. No longer should we be doing guesswork. No longer should we be listening to the loudest squeaky wheel or whatever the phrase is. We should be using data. We are building software to enable that. And then we should design interventions to create good habits and to drive change at scale by using digital nudges. This is a smarter way to help people. This is QUAN. It's early stages for us. It's an example. We're trying to get ahead of the cycle of employee burnout and churn by getting a stronger understanding of people's well-being in a very holistic way, by asking questions about people in both their work life and personal life, by making them more aware of what's not going well and the reasons for that, and then providing them with the means to change their behavior.
Let's not call it greenwashing. Let's call it conscious washing. You're washing your conscience because you can.
All right, we got somebody with his mic on. I'm gonna try and find, but please check if your mics are muted, please.
It is. So the final slide is we're really moving from service-driven to purpose-led, from corporations to networks, and from teams to teaming, from knowing to learning, from management to coaching, and from prescriptive to predictive. That's it.
Well, thank you, Arosha. It was a very interesting story. So now it's time for questions and answers, right? So I'm gonna check if we have anything in Mentimeter. For anyone who has a question, please feel free to share your questions in the Mentimeter link I shared earlier. I'm gonna reshare it for you guys so we can make sure every question gets answered.
I'd be interested to hear if people have observed any other trends that have happened. Like any acceleration. Helps
Okay.
my own research.
And we're definitely going to go there as well. We have the first question popping in from the audience. Can you talk more about putting well-being at the heart of success?
Absolutely. So as an ex-strategy consultant, what's been super interesting is how companies, for the largest part, are driven by KPIs. Yeah? And typically they're financial KPIs. And if we look at the recent statistics on mental health burnouts, we're on the rise. So there is a need for systemic change. And in order to drive systemic change, you need governance and structures in place. So we believe that if we put well-being as part of the definition of success, which means you're not successful if you just hit financial KPIs, if the people are not well, then we are going to drive that systemic change that we want to, right? And if you look at Kate Raworth's work on the donut economy, there's a lot of movements on a political level where countries are assessing if GDP should be the right measure. How do we actually put well-being measures in place? And for people like us that work in organizations, we have a role to play because the majority of adults spend their working hours in organizations. So government alone is not going to change it. So companies need to start thinking about how do we have holistic measures that actually look at how people are and track that and keep it just as important as financial metrics and not something that we do after the fact. So this is that whole thing of the importance of placing well-being at the heart of success is fundamentally about we cannot hope to change the way of working unless we redefine success.
To basically make it a strategic imperative to preserve and foster well-being, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have another question coming in, and any ideas on how to plant a thought seed or get old management to start waking up?
Absolutely. Some data never always helps. It depends on what the problem is that you're trying to solve, right? Like, I mean, it depends on what old mindset they're stuck in. Is it a toxic work culture? Is it a burnout culture? You know, and then essentially if you have data and aggregated insights, which is representative of the team, then you have what it is necessary to make the argument that, hey, we're not okay here. And there's this one person that's sitting there and it's in their best interest to hide the fact, but we're not okay. So, you know, you can do a bottom-up movement. You can drive a bottom-up movement.
I would love to see more bottom-up grassroots movements coming along. We have another question coming from the chat this time. It's from Nicole. Totally on board with the need for systemic change. Can you share examples of what should be measured and valued in decision making?
Absolutely. So for us, you know, with QUAN, we are developing a well-being index, which is a holistic measure of how people are, both in their personal and work life. And we wanted to replace ENPS. Very clear. It's a mission.
Can you explain what EMPS is for the people who are not into your field so much?
Or employee engagement score.
All right.
And it is like a customer NPS score. How likely are you to recommend this company? And most companies use it as a single measure of how the people are. And it's not true. It doesn't tell you how the people are. We need more holistic measures which actually look at how people are and use those. And founders and leaders should be looking at that. It's a more realistic view of how people are than some arbitrary, you know, how likely are you to recommend this company to someone else? It doesn't tell anything.
We got some more questions coming in around that, asking about KPIs for managing those strategically. And me, myself, I'm also an organizational psychologist, and the psychological safety popping up here, and then well-being score here, burnout score there, lots of tools being developed. What's maybe also a small step people can take on their own before hiring somebody else? What's maybe like a minimum viable product for measuring?
Yes, so the assessment that we've developed is and you know, you're in organizational psychology, so you'll appreciate this. We look at 5 dimensions: the body, the mind, meaning, social connectedness, and self-fulfillment. Underneath that, there's 48 subdimensions. So for example, in body, there's sleep, fitness, exercise, and the mind, there's concentration, anxiety, stress. And underneath that, there's more than 200 predictors, right? People that don't understand well-being or haven't researched it wouldn't know how complicated it actually is. There is no quick fix. What we need to do is collectively improve the self-awareness of people to take check of themselves. And then we need systems in place so that teams and organizations can create a context for individuals to thrive. But it first starts with understanding the topic, and there is no shortcut when it comes to understanding the topic. This is why companies that say, oh, there's a mental health crisis. Here we have Headspace. And then they have 15 to 25% adoption. And then they still have people burning out. Why? Because the team context was the context that gave work stress for that person to actually burn out. So an easy way, a place to start is to start thinking of how do I get the insights to actually check how people are by using some kind of holistic measure. And then how do I provide the relevant support, and how can I as a team lead provide the right context so that people feel safe to talk about things? And how can we develop better ways of working based on that? If 50% of your team are stressed at work and at home, if 70% are not sleeping, maybe you shouldn't have the evening calls.
I love how you put it, like use data, get the conversation started on what is happening in our context and how can we adapt our surroundings to make us feel better and thrive. I love the thriving part of it also.
Yes.
We have another question going a little bit in the same direction, but giving it another turn, asking about limitations of quantitative indicators when working with complex dynamic social systems as organizations are. And so what's your take on that one?
So when you do, when we talk about quantitative analysis, we're simply asking people to self-rate. It's based on perception. So if, you know, questions such as in the past 4 weeks, I've experienced stress at work. We're not separating the person with numbers. You know, in fact, it's the opposite. We're asking someone, how do you perceive the situation to be? And then you're aggregating that up. And the complex system at work, yes, I understand. But change starts with the individual, and change starts with a small group. When I watched Simon Sinek give a talk about how he helped drive the transformation of a company of 120,000, I thought it was going to be the undoing of Simon Sinek when he was asked this question. It's a live Q&A. Someone got up and said, Simon, all your talks are great, but how do you do a transformation? I think the question was 60,000. And he answered, well, I've done it for 120,000. And then I was like hanging, like, what is he going to say? And he said, aim for the 10%. Aim for the 10% that are going to be your ambassadors, get them on board, show them how when you do something, you can change that little group, and then it'll grow and there'll be laggards. But eventually, when you get the majority, the system has changed. It's called the power of the edge, right?
So what you're saying is start small, get the people who are already invested, empower them, make them, give them the voice, give them the resources to follow through with the cause and experiment with the new ways.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? In any given organization, 20,000, 100,000, there are people-focused leaders. And they protect their teams and they care about their teams, and they're looking out there for the best ways to create the best structures and provide the best context of their team. These are the leaders that don't care what's happening in the organization because they're so hell-bent on their teams. And you know what? One of them will talk to the other one and the other one and the other one, and that's how it changes, right? So we don't foresee ourselves selling into HR.
So back to the network thought you were predicting, right? So we have
Absolutely.
a movement here, we have people self-organized, connecting with each other, creating that movement, moving forward out of their own purpose, not because somebody prescribed it to them.
No, it's a network of teams.
All right. So and Moni, Sophia, I think she is asking basically concentrate on early adapters. Is that what you're saying?
If you want to drive a movement, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, early adopters. But I mean, you know, I'm now a tech founder, and that is like the known thing. You start with a beta product, and your early adopters, your first 20 customers, 50 customers are critical, right? And from that, you get your understanding on, okay, what will the masses need? With anything, you start with the early adopters, the ones that are going to champion it, the ones that want to do it really, really badly. And indeed, when I reflect on that conversation with Simon Sinek, what he said was the original change management plan for the transformation was we're going to mandate all middle managers to take this on and go forward. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to have a very long application form. and you're going to tell them that there's going to be an offsite on the weekend in the West Coast, and they're in the East Coast. And about 20 managers signed up. And he said, those are your ambassadors.
So don't make it too easy. Is that what you're saying?
Your early adopters are the ones that have a hair on fire problem that they need to solve.
All right. So let's see what other questions we have. Here we go, another one. Many times people are praised for the accomplishments of work that is visible, while other employees' work, which is not so visible, is never seen and celebrated. So we know from psychology's accomplishments and celebrating them is super important. So what would you do about that if you realize some people's work is more appreciated than the work of others?
It's a very specific example. If the issue is that people's work goes unseen, then perhaps the answer lies in, do you have shared goals where you can see people's contribution towards those goals? Do you talk about the shared goals and say, you know, in the world of tech, we call them OKRs, objective key results. And it's very clear, like for this week or for this month or for this quarter, this is what we want to hit. And then underneath that, typically teams or individuals understand their role in achieving that. And so you celebrate whenever someone makes a step point. So it is about transparency, right? It's not about on a Friday, read out the list of stuff that you've done. It is, here is the team goals or the company goals, and this is how we've moved. Now let's look at fundamental step changes that have been done, and let's celebrate where that's been done. If you do that, you create transparency, not in just what is achieved, but how it's been achieved, right?
Great answer. So how would you do, like, what's an example of your company working with objectives and key results? Like, where is the point where you celebrate? Like, how do you celebrate at QUAN?
We have a team of 20 spread across 7 time zones. We're now in Y Combinator. For those of you that don't know it, it is the world's most intense accelerator that's coming out of Silicon Valley. It is a 3-month program, and we have weekly goals. We have weekly targets, commercial targets, product targets, and we have product people, customer success people, we have salespeople, we have a tech team, we have a people science team, and we are all working on these shared goals. And we have a weekly meeting where we talk about those goals, and then we give an opportunity for people to share updates or insights that may not be reflected in the numbers that we're tracking. And we celebrate wins all the time. We have a Slack channel, and we have different, we have a general, but we have by function as well. And we have little alert systems for key wins.
Awesome.
If someone does something, everyone gets behind it, puts all sorts of emojis on it. And that's it.
So again, leverage the tools we have, right? Like, use all the information we can use, everything we have in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
We have another super interesting question about your thoughts regarding increasing well-being and empowerment through the acquisition and development of soft skills through the use of concrete and powerful tools. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, soft skills, it could be anything. It's not just emotional intelligence to connect better with other people. Let's start with the emotional intelligence to better understand yourself, right?
You talked about the 5 aspects of your holistic approach, right? Like we have mental,
Yes.
we have spiritual energy, we have emotional energy we need to take care of. Is that where you would be going?
Absolutely. Like people should invest. I always say during COVID, the 2 years where we couldn't travel externally, that was the perfect time to travel internally. Right? There are so many people. We had like a literal matrix moment, like where people were like, oh, how do I get wired back into the system from which you've just been released, right? But there are so many people that just weren't conscious or aware that, hey, the system is on pause. You don't need to do what you were doing before. Spend the time to go deeper. And so that's why psychologists, you know, in many countries, there was like a...
That sounds like a good, pure energy. I love that one.
Very in touch with themselves. No, but I think it's a case of you could have used the time to better connect with yourself and understand actually what is important for me, and hang on, like, you know, what are my triggers? I think if more people were aware of what their triggers are and what motivates them, we'd have a lot less issues. I'm pointing to what we're having right now in Europe. You know, so a little bit of self-awareness and self-reflection is an absolute soft skill that if we can do that, the quality of the decisions made by people will drastically improve.
So basically the naming of soft skill is a bit misguiding, right? Like, so knowing yourself, like I love this, having a manual for yourself. Like I could hand out to people telling them how I'm to be worked with and where my trigger points are and where my strengths are. And hey, please double check the details when working with me. I'm really not good at that one. I love people who can basically hand me that manual, because then, hey, I know what to do and watch out for.
And even if you don't have the manual, at least create that safe space for people to be able to say that, right? And to be able to be vulnerable, whether you're a leader or you're an employee, to be able to say, you know what? I told my team on Monday, hey guys, it's the last 4 weeks of YC and I'm stressed out. I'm very reactive. I'm going to say stuff that will come out of left field, but please know that it's my own issues and it's not on you. And if at any point you think, why is she saying that? Have the conversation, but I'm not going to be very clear in my mind. Starts with stuff like that, right?
Get the conversation starting, right? Like that was your point all along, is like, let's talk about it, but in a meaningful way where we have the information we need, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm running dry on questions here, so feel free to pop another. Oh, there is one. Mental health has been a difficult topic, especially in recruitment. How can we change that?
Yeah, I think it's changing. I'm curious, and maybe the person can jump on stage as well. I don't know if that's enabled, but
yeah, for sure.
What do we mean by mental health is difficult in recruitment? I think that deserves a little bit of unpacking.
Whoever asks the question, feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I can try and unpack it with Arosha together. But you can feel completely safe and opening up about
sorry.
it.
It was
fine.
me. I was talking about mental health in terms of, for example, depression or people who are going through a lot of difficulties. I can talk about different cases. We even had with my team, we had a talk about the matter of depression, of people feeling down sometimes, of creating the space to be down and to acknowledge it. And for example, you have a breakdown during a meeting, how do you handle it, right? Some people just go, oh, sorry, I have bad connection. Or some people might just go, wait, there's some problem happening here at the house, I have to leave. Why don't you just acknowledge, yeah, I'm not feeling good, I'm sorry, but I have to leave the meeting, these kind of things. This is one of the topics, but for example, I'm not familiar with this, but there are people who have very worse mental conditions such as schizophrenia, such as bipolarity, like how do you address this in a company? Because I've seen in different recruitment processes, not everybody asks about mental health if you do have any background, but I've seen in other recruitment processes more recently. And the question is here is, are people going to be judged on that? Most likely people will not include or be afraid to include that because they would be afraid to be judged on that and not get through the recruitment process, for example.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, the topics related to any kind of illness, disability, condition is extremely private. And, you know, that's why I think GDPR exists. And some people talk about things and some people don't. But I think from an organizational perspective, your responsibility is to create a context which is safe for your people, regardless of what they're going through. And if you are, and regardless of whether or not they want to share it, the main thing is, do you create a context for that person to thrive, which means that they can take the time out in private if that's what they want, or they can reach out and get help if they want. And so it is not for the organization to know nor take on board all the baggage that we as individuals have. That is too much. Not even a manager should have that, right? I am responsible for the well-being of my 1-year-old and my 6-year-old, but my mother is not responsible for mine. I'm an adult now. But this is why it's really important for the organization to recognize what they're responsible for. You're responsible for the context, and that's it. Do you provide the safe space, and do you provide the right level kind of support if and when the person needs it? And this is what we are, you know, hinting at in terms of safety and psychological safety, right? So that would be my answer to that.
Thank you. It makes complete sense. Because I see like this is a topic that's arising more and more, and we see the numbers growing, escalating. And it's something that, well, we should be able to not address, but understand and integrate in the companies. It shouldn't be a taboo topic, or people shouldn't feel bad about it.
No, and we all have our things that
we have our moments.
Yeah, we have our moments. We have, you know, someone might suffer from ADHD or ADD, or someone else might have agoraphobia. But I mean, if they're managing it, they're managing it. But if they need support, they should be able to seek support.
Thank you.
We already kind of scratched in the next question, going towards psychological safety. Like, what are artifacts and rituals that you could use to promote psychological safety in the workplace? Or what are you doing at QUAN, for example, consciously to do that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. It's. I mean, I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson, and I think when it comes to psychological safety, it goes two ways, which is really important to keep in mind. Psychological safety essentially is like creating this environment where people can speak freely, right? And when they observe things, be able to say it, right? The examples that Amy Edmondson gave in her original book about it was around how many mistakes in surgery could be avoided if the people that weren't the surgeon felt like they could say, hey, that seems to be a mistake. Yeah, but the psychological safety was low, so they didn't speak up, and hence the surgery went wrong. You know, so rituals which create a context where there is the ability for people to speak up when things are not okay. So for us, we share the highs as well as the lows, right? We talk about when we made mistakes. If someone gives what could be seen as feedback or criticism, then we are a very multidisciplinary team. But just because you're not in the sales function doesn't mean you can't put your hand up and say, hey, that seems a bit weird, maybe you can try this. It means that people are not boxed into, but you are X and therefore you cannot talk about Y. You need to create an environment where topics are discussed, it's transparent, the highs and lows are shared, and people are encouraged to step outside of whatever it is they're responsible for to think wider. When you do that, there is a natural level of psychological safety, and that is work-related, right? On the other front, if we take it on a personal front, it's important that people can be vulnerable. It's important that you create a context that recognizes both the personal and work life. And that sometimes personal life sucks. And there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Divorces, deaths in family, financial insecurity. Those things don't just stay at home. They come with them to work. And you need to create a context where people feel safe and fun and can be vulnerable, where I'm not going to be able to perform at my best because of X. And I think that's an element of psychological safety we have not discussed enough, because everything seems to be skewed towards work. So those are the two.
So you're basically saying that there needs to be work-life integration, like we need to acknowledge how much both influences each other, and maybe also the fact that we can't separate it from each other, and therefore acknowledge it from the company side as well.
Yeah, at QUAN, we take well-being very seriously. We have team members that have taken a week off because they felt the signs of burnout coming. We talked openly about it. People took time out, and then they came back to work, and everybody asked if they had a good time, and we held the space while they were gone. We've done that multiple times. Nobody's burnt out in the last 2 years, but people came close to it. So, and it's neither good nor bad, but it's this recognition that life happens.
I love that like engagement and burnout are very connected to each other, right? Like we are all asking for a more engaged workforce, but then we are basically increasing the risk of burnout when we have higher engaged people who are like really believing in the purpose of the company, giving their all, giving their best, and going beyond basically everything. Then we need to have this conversation also when we maybe did exactly that and need to step back for a little to just recover and take the rest we need, right?
That's why if you put well-being as part of the definition of success, you prevent that from happening. We have a senior engineer on our team that is working too much. So they're so married to what they're doing, and we're actively now engaging with, we need to sort of take it down a notch.
Awesome. Again, I have no question to go to other than my own, maybe. I'd be curious what could I do today? Like, what's my first little step I could do to move into that direction?
I would start with yourself, which is like, are you taking adequate time to check in with yourself, right? For me as well. Are you taking the time to look after yourself? And even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, what are your little rituals that you have to check in? Do you write things out? Do you know what your triggers are? Are you aware of what your limitations are? Are there things that are slipping that you've just not had time to address? Start with yourself, and then look at the team and start the discussion with the team. Make it okay to talk about personal and work life. Start to take the topic of well-being beyond just any kind of perks that the company might offer into how does it become a core part of our culture? How do we ensure that our people are okay on the way to whatever success we are chasing, whatever that may be? That's how I would start.
So start a little experiment, self-reflect, and get out there into the little bit of uncomfort and try out what it means to open up at work about how you feel, what you do, what you need.
It is all about getting into the unknown and exploring that. And if you're in that space, you're going to figure out so much more. And that's what Teal is all about, right? Like unknown. It's not the known. Get into the unknown and come up with new things that can then come back into the system and help us change. We need new ingredients.
That's what I love about the Thrive concept, the vitality part, like how much energy do I have and how much I'm learning at the same time, needing to balance it and needing to like, yeah, reload, refuel my energy every once in a while. So we have 5 more minutes left. So I think one last question. Any channel you'd like, turn on the mic, put it in a chat, put it in the Menti. If there is no last question,
there's one.
There is Nara. Hi.
Hey. I think this question is more like based on my experience, there's a difficulty in selling well-being as part of success to CEOs, to people that are in power, especially when they are in transition to self-management, which is what I work with. And sometimes, like I have one client now, and they keep asking for indicators of how this is going to contribute to profit and how can we balance, like this focus on people and self-development and relations and, purpose and everything with, profit. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
this.
Well, we're a startup in the well-being space, and it's all about what the business model is and what the metrics are. We're very clear. It comes down to there is a worldwide issue when it comes to attrition. If you work with startups, the statistics are attrition is highest in the first year. 1 in 4 quit in the first year. And the other one is burnout. And the cost of replacing someone is usually double the salary. That's the general statistic. So you're looking at how to lower attrition, how to lower absenteeism or sick rates. And the other one, which is really interesting, is the cost of disengagement. Because when someone's not engaged, right now we can only measure if someone's not at work, right? But what about the people that are at work but are not engaged? Right? So this is why well-being, for the largest part, is about how people are engaged. If you are good at knowing where the triggers are, you get ahead of attrition and burnout. And you also see when and why people may not be disengaged. You get to the heart of the issue, right? One concrete example, we were working with a company, they did the assessment. One particular person came across their results, their social connectedness in their personal life was super low. The reason? They are now in the Netherlands, their family is in Slovakia. They had not been home for 2 years. The way this was manifesting was having arguments with their team members all the time. Turns out the reason why they were having arguments is the team would start speaking Dutch. Everybody thought she was annoying. The reason was poor social connectedness because of personal life. Once they knew that, they were able to think about how do we support her outside of work.
Again, such a great answer. Thanks, Nara. And I think we're basically done for the day. Something to celebrate. We had the question on how do we celebrate? How do we appreciate? So pop out those emoticons and applaud or whatever you'd like to do to show some appreciation for this great story of and yeah, of well-being in the workplace. And we will continue this conversation basically in spatial chat. There is a garden too. It's gonna go on for like an hour or so. I'm gonna post the link in the chat just now, so feel free to join there. I'll be around also for the first half hour or so, and happy to yeah, dig deeper and yeah, continue this conversation. And I think it's a very important conversation to have. Thank you, Arosha, for this great input today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye.